Okay, so I think we'll kick off now. So thanks very much. Okay, everybody, welcome. This is to Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley's next webinar, Innovator Toolkit series. This one's Understanding the Changing MedTech Regulatory Landscape. This is webinar 5 of 7. Yes, we've gone through 5 of these already. 2 more to come up every 2 weeks. They're coming up, so please do think of signing up. So this is the series of them. We've gone through all the ones in brown, kind of grayish. We're doing this one here. Next one's market access, and after that, developing an NHS business case. Should you want to sign up, we'll provide the link later on. So we're Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley. A little bit of kind of housekeeping. The session is being recorded. We'll tidy it up and then we'll put it on YouTube with a link on our website and to everyone who's signed up to attend. And we will send out the slide pack after. So we'll make a PDF of the presentation slides. So don't feel you have to write everything down. There's a lot of content in there, a lot of really useful stuff. But we will send that out to you so you have that. So don't worry about it. If for some reason you don't get it, send us an email and we will help you out to find that. Okay. So who are we? I've done this the last 4, so I won't go into too much detail on it. Essentially, we're Health Innovation Oxford and Thames Valley. We work with the NHS, universities and industry. We've done that for over 10 years. We're commissioned mainly by NHS England and the Office for Life Sciences. We help accelerate kind of adoption and spread of innovation across all those, doing lots of great things, help addressing health inequalities, saving NHS money, delivering economic growth as well. So we keep ourselves busy. We serve about 3 million people in Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, Oxfordshire, Frimley and Milton Keynes, and we match high value innovations with kind of needs. And we have 4 clinical priorities, not exclusively, but mainly cardiovascular disease, maternity and neonatal, mental health and respiratory disease. And as you might know already, we're part of a national network of 15 health innovation networks. As a group, we're called the Health Innovation Network, not to confuse everybody, and we were originally called Academic Health Science Networks, or AHSNs. Exactly the same businesses, same organizations, just changed the names a few months ago. And we're re-licensed until 2028 as Health Innovation Networks, and we realized these things happened last year. And we've done a lot of great stuff in that time. So understanding the changing MedTech regulatory landscape, we're going to kick off now. I'm going to do a quick intro to Neil and then I'll let him take over and kind of do a bit more if that helps. So we're very pleased and fortunate to have Neil speak today. So many letters behind his name that I can't get into all of them. Hopefully Neil can explain some of those. I think essentially the takeaway is that Neil knows what he's talking about and has been doing it for many years. So Neil is the principal consultant of MediQuest Limited, a regulatory affairs management company based in Peterborough in the UK and Waterford in Ireland. And he's got a background in a wide range of medical devices, electromechanical equipment. You can see he is an engineer, so he knows his engineering bits. He knows the regulatory bits as well. His specializations are in regulatory borderline issues and application of regulations to new technologies in the EU and US regulatory environments. He's got over 35 years of healthcare industry experience in engineering, manufacturing, and quality, including 25 years in regulatory affairs roles, specifically with leading medical technology companies such as Smiths Medical, Teleflex Incorporated, and TAP Bioscience. So I think it goes without saying that Neil knows what he's talking about. So I think we're very pleased to have him here today to talk us through. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and allow Neil to present his slides, and I will put it over to you, Neil, do the main presentation. We'll take questions and answers at the end, just so you know. Okay.
Okie doke. Hi there. Well, good lunchtime, everybody. And thanks, Matthew, for the introduction. The only thing you left out was mentioning the fact that, of course, I was commander of Apollo 11 and the first man on the moon. But I think if I mention that, that'll get me in trouble. So don't play on the name too much. Okay, so what I want to do is try and set regulatory affairs for MedTech in context, and probably the context of developing a medical device. So you probably got something like this in terms of a timescale for your design project, where you'll make a go decision that you've finally got the right design, you've done all your scientific research, you're happy that you've got the right idea, you now want to make a functioning device. And it's very much at this stage you need to determine what your markets are, whether you've got a viable device whether it has a benefit, risk, advantage, then work through your design process, your testing, your transfer into manufacture, your scale up, and then your post sale. And there are the bottom line I've got on this is really where I see the regulatory affairs stuff coming in. The global markets. Yes, you need to think about where you make your device. Yes, you need to think about where you can sell your device, but you also need to factor in the regulatory complexity of different markets for your device. Some devices are very much easier to bring to market in a different jurisdiction to the one in which you're based. Consider whether that gives you an advantage, whether that would enable you to get to market more quickly. And the emphasis I always throw in with medical device manufacture is that it's all about getting to market quickly, because the longer you take, every minute you take longer, that cash pile that you've managed to raise through grant funding, through investor funding, however you've managed to raise it, is gradually dripping away. And you've got to be careful that you don't let it drip away so quickly that you end up, the pile of money has run out before you've actually got a product ready for market. And I'm afraid I've been through this so often with regulatory submissions that I just want to point that out up front. The shorter you can make your implementation project, the greater the likelihood of success, because inevitably it's going to take longer than you think to happen. So that's my first message. My second message is to think about don't just do the timeline, the Gantt chart of your project and think that's it. Think about what's happening to your cash during that time, and are you going to have enough money at the right stages in that project? If you have a look at the graph on the right, follow the blue line. It's comparatively cheap when you're just going through the early parts of your research and design study. It starts to accelerate downwards. You're burning through the cash when you start having to pay for external third-party testing, when you're looking to pay for a clinical trial, when you're looking for some expert help in putting that regulatory submission together, when you're having to pay agency fees or notified body, approved body fees for reviewing that regulatory submission. And then you're gradually you're heading right down into as far negative as you're going to go. At that point, too many companies run out of money before they've got that product approval, when they're right at the bottom of that dip. So think if there is another way you can do it. And if you look now at the left-hand side, at the left-hand graph, what I've got is a red line, and it's saying, well, maybe there's a first thing we could do. We've got a good bit of technology. Could we license that to somebody in an entirely different field? It's not even a medical device. We don't have to bother about any of this regulatory stuff. Have we got something that we could license out somewhere, maybe into sports science or something like that, that would actually just generate that little bit of cash to cope with the everyday, so that you're not plunging immediately into that negative territory. Instead of building up that mountain of debt Are you able to then maybe come up with a low risk medical device, a medium risk medical device, and then finally get to perhaps the high risk revolutionary new product that you want to have? And by the time you get there, you've got income streams that are going to support that development, rather than risk running out of money in that dreaded cash pit. So think of what you can do, because it will take longer than you think to get through the regulatory process. Okay, so let's talk specifically about medical technology regulation. And the first thing I've got to say is, when it comes to regulation, we shouldn't really be thinking about medical technologies. It's the medical application of technologies. It's technologies that are already in use in other disciplines. And so, in addition to the medical device regulations, there may well be laws, regulations, or standards from other fields where you're using bits of technology. There may already be a state of the art for what you're doing established in another area. If you're using microfluidics, maybe the state of the art is coming from the aerospace industry, and maybe that offers you standards, ways of showing that you've got a safe and effective product that you can import, that doesn't directly come from medical device regulations or medical device standards. So if I'm saying my sort of square, that my three-dimensional square there, and I've got a red blob on it, my three-dimensional square is the field of regulations. And what I'm saying is, I've now got a medical device a product that's going to be regulated as a medical device under medical device regulations, and that's that funny sort of red shape that I've got there. Whoops, what we've probably got is we've got bits of technology from other areas. We maybe have something coming in from aerospace. We maybe have something coming in from the chemical industry or the consumer products industries. We've maybe got some general electronics, maybe some bits and pieces coming from automotive. Maybe we've got some things and regulation, some parts that are coming from mobile phone, if we're Bluetoothing onto an app maybe, and if we've got an app, we've probably built that on some software of unknown provenance, colloquially known as soup. So we've got all sorts of different areas which are handled and regulated differently, that build in and feed in to our medical device area. So when we look in terms of regulations, we might find that, because think about, say, a pump. If we're thinking about a pump, we've probably got some form of pressure vessel in there, and that may be under the pressure vessel regulations. If all we've got is a pressure regulator from from a cylinder, that may well be under pressure vessel regulations. We've probably got a machinery part, something that moves, something that comes under the machinery regulations. We maybe have an electrical control system that's fairly normal these days. And then for the electrical hardware, we've maybe got safety regulations, we've maybe got EMC regulations that come in. On top of that, we've probably got software, and that's bringing in all sorts of other regulations, like general data control regulations, about cybersecurity. Maybe you've got specific requirements if you want to go into the NHS in the UK, whether about NHS networks and how you integrate with networks with other other equipment, if this is something that's to be linked together, how you maybe want to communicate with the nurse's workstation. These are areas which, yes, are covered by the medical device regulation, but are also covered by other regulations in other fields, from other sources, other standards that you have to meet in order to have a viable product. So the regulatory field is looking increasingly complex, and there is a big green elephant in the room with everything to do with healthcare at the moment, and that's zero carbon. How are we going to meet zero carbon emissions? We've spent lots of time going down a single-use medical device route. We've spent lots of time dealing with pre-sterilized products, and we now have to question, in a recyclable, in a zero carbon world, when recycling is very much more important, when we have to be very concerned about fluoridized gas regulations. How are we going to deal with this? Is our product still viable? Are we designing a product for the future, or a product that is going to have a very finite life because of the increasing environmental regulations? Be aware that in Europe, in the US, certain jurisdictions have moved faster than national governments, so there may well be local regulations that affect whether your product is universally usable or acceptable in a particular country. To state the obvious, I'm sure you remember, under Donald Trump, lots of green regulations got put on hold, but various states went ahead anyway. So it may vary from state to state in the US. It varies from land to land in Germany. It may be, so you've even got regional variations. And finally, let me give you some good news. A lot of the basic high-level concept of MedTech regulation is harmonized. The three major jurisdictions in terms of different regulations are the USA, the EU, and I suppose now we have to think about the UK as being the old EU. The MDD that was left over is still the current UK regulations. Europe has moved on, but UK has just basically interpreted the old regulations. So where are we? If you look along the first line, we have each one of these jurisdictions has a risk-based class system. In the US, we've got 3 classes by regulation. In the UK, 4 classes based on rules. In the EU, 10 plus classes now based by rules. So what does this actually mean? Yes, the concept is the same. The implementation and the detail is very different in the different jurisdictions. And this is something we're going to keep coming back to throughout medical device regulation. Everybody's had the same idea, but implemented it in a slightly different way, will require slightly different documentation from you, will require slightly different testing from you. And all those little differences end up to an awful lot more work. Now, when medical devices first started to be regulated in the US, this was in the 1970s. And the idea then was they got all the medical devices they could find together, and they got their experts to sort them out, initially just by the area in which they were used, and then by what they did and then which ones they thought were all the same devices. And that's how they sorted them out and came up with a classification system that they codified into regulations in the US. And what they said was, you know, half of these are basically, they're things like bandages, they're little stainless steel instruments, they're things that are everyday. We really don't need to know very much about them. So for these low risk items, all we require is a database entry. We just want to know that we want to know that you're making a scalpel. We know what a scalpel is. We know people know how to make scalpels. And as long as we know that this one is made by you, if something goes wrong, we know to come back to you on it. So it was just very much a simple database entry. For the high risk products, for things that were definitely life supporting, life sustaining, that would cause irreparable harm to a patient if they went wrong, the FDA said, I think we actually want to approve these. We want to look at these, really carefully examine them, make sure that you're presenting us with scientific proof that they're safe and effective. And that left a problem area of about 45% in the middle. Those ones that were a medium risk, they could definitely harm the patient. They could cause significant harm to the patient, but they weren't really in the high risk category. They were common everyday things. Lots of these are the electronic things that we plug into a patient, the tubes that we put inside a patient, the anesthetic tubes, feeding tubes. These sort of things came into this middle region where they could definitely cause harm if they were wrong. And what they said, what the FDA did in the US, and they've still stuck with this, is the idea of if there's a product already on the market, it was probably okay. Therefore, if you can show you're substantially equivalent to that, as in you're broadly equivalent in terms of safety and effectiveness, and that's what the delta SE is supposed to signify, showing that you're broadly equivalent to a comparison or predicate device in terms of safety and effectiveness, then that's all you need to tell us. Just show us that you're broadly equivalent to something that's already on the market, and you too can compete. You too can put a product onto the market, and will allow you to make a stepwise evolutionary change. But if you make a revolutionary change, we'll put you up into that high category, that system where we want to do a formal approval of you. When Europe first started regulating medical devices under the MDD in the early 90s, they took a slightly different approach, and they said, well, we can actually classify by rules. We don't have to classify by regulation. We can see what the rules are. We can learn from the US system. We want a little bit more. We want the manufacturer to self-certify that they've produced the technical documents, that they've done it, that they've got a quality system, that they've done things the right way even for the low risk devices, but we don't need third-party oversight. For the middle range devices, we do need third-party oversight. In the UK, this is now approved body oversight, that a medical device meets the essential requirement. These are the basic features of safety and performance for any medical device. So it's things like saying, let's look at electrical regs for on the electrical side of things, for example, it should be earthed, it should be safe, it should not give a shock to the patient or the clinician using it. It should also not make so much electromagnetic radiation that it starts interfering with every other piece of equipment around it. That clearly would be unacceptable. So it's the essential requirements, these basic requirements, these basic truths that should be true for all medical devices for all time. This was the original idea. And yes, again, the idea that for the 5-10% of really high risk devices, things that were really important, they did want a more formal approval, not just a quick audit of your technical documentation. What you'd done was right. They actually wanted to be on top of it and any change that you made to it. And this has just been extended in the European system now. It's the same principle. In Europe, instead of our UK approved bodies, EU has notified bodies. They have general safety and performance requirements. It's many more words. It's a much longer, more complex regulation than the one that we're still using in the UK. But at the high level, the concepts, the ideas behind it are still much the same. So if we look at the old MDD, which is very much what a lot of products are still made to, and it's what we're currently using in the UK, although confusingly we now term it the UK MDR, but that's only just because we tried to pick a deliberately confusing TLA to give it. And the MDR, the European MDR, the concept is still there that we have a hierarchy of classes that are broadly risk-based, and as the risk increases all the way through these classes, the involvement of a notified body, of a third-party assessor of some form to determine whether the product is safe and whether it meets its claimed performance is there. Again, in terms of documentation and systems, there's a lot of commonality at the high level. You have a design history file in the USA. In Europe and the UK, we have a design file. It's basically a design history file. It's the history of the design. We have a device master record in the US. In the UK, we have a technical file. In the EU, we have technical documentation. We're playing about a little bit with words, but it's the same broad things. But watch out, the detail is different. The minimum requirements are different. It doesn't mean that you can't make the one file that works for 3 different jurisdictions, but it does mean it won't happen by accident. If you just if you just look at the UK regulations and make a technical file, that may be okay for Europe. It may be missing some things. It may be okay for the US. It may be missing some things. It won't happen by accident. The devil is always in the detail with regulatory issues. Device history record, your batch record, again, exactly the same thing. The terminology is different. The concepts are the same, and the detailed implementation is quite different. For the quality system, much more commonality. Everybody, including now the US, is moving towards 13485 as a standard for a quality system. At the moment, the US still doesn't have a requirement for a quality manual. UK and Europe do, because that comes directly out of the standard. The US is still with its existing quality system regulation, but the new one based on 13485 is now published and it's out there. And if you're not on the market yet and you're thinking of coming to the market, that's really the set of US regulations to look at. We've got quality procedures. They're basically the same, but which ones are mandatory and what has to be in them, that is different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Same with the product specific work instructions, the same with your documentation and record keeping. All of them have a requirement to keep a regulatory compliance file, to have a regulatory compliance system, but very different how it's put together. In the US, you have an official correspondent, or if you're an international company, a US agent for dealing with the FDA. In the UK, you have a UK responsible person. In the EU, you may have an EU authorised rep and a person responsible for regulatory compliance if you manufacture in the EU. So the implementation of of regulatory compliance is very different. The documentation is different. The players, the people, the roles that you have in order to ensure that compliance are different, but the concept that you have to have regulatory compliance documentation is exactly the same. So all systems, what you're pulling together is you're pulling together a pyramid of quality documentations with the policy and the manual at the very top, going all the way down to individual batch records at the very bottom, and you're pulling together a technical pyramid of regulations, going from the technical file or your submission, your regulatory submission, your medical device file, your device master record at the top, through drawing specifications, protocols, forms, templates, all the way down through to data sheets and records at the bottom. You've also got a whole set of different implementations beneath this. Look at my three pyramids. If you look at them at the top, if you just look at a top level, they all look like a purple pyramid. They all look basically the same, like a purple pyramid. But when you look down underneath, by the time you get through to implementing them on the ground, they're all very, very different. They've changed significantly. So let's talk about the changes. What we're looking at, sorry, let me just go back to the last slide a second and say, so roughly what you've got is, if you like, the US, which is an old consistent system on the left. You've got the UK system, which is something skinnier, very different in the middle, and then you've got the US burgeoning system, growing in width at the bottom. Lot more detailed documentation required in both the US and the European system. The UK system is more like a core document at the moment. Other things that you've got a de-skilling of the compliance assessment. What we're trying to do is to take a lot out of what we're trying to do is to de-skill the notified body, the approved body role. Instead of it being the old days when you had an expert with many years experience on a whole host of devices in a whole host of different companies or organizations come in to see you. We're now, and I suppose this is a little bit disingenuous, we're dealing with somebody relatively fresh out of school, fresh out of university, with very little real world experience. Maybe he's only implemented a quality system in one company, and all they really know how to do is to go through a checklist and check that you've got the things that you must have, that you've met the mandatory requirements. So in terms of changes, the other big change that's happening at the moment is e-submissions. And with e-submissions, what we're actually doing is we're going to a lot of adaptive form filling, that when you answer one question, that tends to determine the next question that you get asked on the form. And this makes it really difficult for you to collate all the information before you start. And very often when you're part way through a form, you can't save the data. You'll find approved bodies, notified bodies are going to this system, competent authorities are going to this system. We're up against it a lot. You don't know, you can't get all the information together and then fill out the form. What happens is you find you get 2/3 of the way down a page, suddenly it wants something that you never thought of, like your VAT registration number to go in there. You rush off to accounts, you manage to find your VAT registration number, you rush back and the page has timed out. And that means that you then have to start going in, logging in again to that submission. It's another half hour on the process. What has gone from a couple of hours filling out a form by hand has suddenly become a couple of days work filling out one of these adaptive forms on the internet, and you'd think e-submissions would make things quicker. Really, they haven't done. Then you need to be aware that that form, no one is going to review it actually as the form that you've filled out. That is going to be transferred into a reviewer form. What they're going to do is to suck the XML data out of your form and reprocess it. And it may go to different members of a review team, different subject matter experts, different area experts, somebody on software, somebody on hardware, somebody on mechanical systems, somebody on pressure vessels. They go to different people with different skill codes. You are no longer dealing with the expert who knows specifically about your product. And the danger here is that you may not have said the obvious. Sorry, excuse me a second. So the obvious things which you may not have said is, think of an example. We've got a probe that we call an esophageal probe, and it is for measuring blood flow. It goes into the esophagus. It's an esophageal probe. Because we've called it an esophageal probe, we've never actually said repeatedly in the documentation in every area that it goes in the esophagus. So you suddenly find one of the reviewers who's only seen part of the submission hasn't picked up on this and thinks, oh, well, if it's measuring blood flow, it's got to be going into the aorta. Whoa, that's much higher risk. I want to see all sorts of different testing on this. So one of the things that can happen with this is that it's not the carefully crafted submission that you put together that's being reviewed. It's an entirely different submission. Another change that's coming in is this idea that we're having harmonized audits and submissions. And that sounds great, but bear in mind, there's a very small core that is going to be the same for all jurisdictions. And there's going to be different sized elements. So for a quality system, we've got a medical device single audit program called MDSAP. That holds for Australia and New Zealand. You can look at the core and then look at an Australian and New Zealand simple system. So the core maybe takes 4 days. Australia and New Zealand bit takes another day. The EU bit takes 2 days, perhaps. So the USA bit takes 3 days. Your core 4-day audit is perhaps built into 2.5 weeks by the time you get through all the different countries that you need to add in. Yes, it's harmonized, but is it really any less work than having to cope with an audit from different regulators every 3 or 4 years? So the takeaways I'd like you to have today is that you need to integrate all aspects of your project plan, whether that's design, IP, manufacture, testing, trialing, marketing, regulatory, everything. You need a holistic project plan. Don't just concentrate on developing the product and throw regulatory in at the end, because you have to be looking at understanding what the regulatory requirements you have to meet are, how you do that through your testing and trialing, how you do that by your selection of processes, of materials, of manufacturing technologies, and how you allow for those in your design. You need to have a regulatory plan right at the start. It will change as you go through the process. I would say get the best possible regulatory advice, get the best regulatory advice you can afford at the start and the end of the project, when you're laying out the plan and you're doing that final stage before you submit it to a regulator or a third-party reviewer. Those are when you need the best regulatory advice you can possibly get. If you want to do it yourself in between, you probably can, but remember where I started. Time is king. Time burns money when it comes to getting products to market, and cash flow kills companies. If it's going to save you a lot of time, and it will save you a lot of time, we can do all the regulatory work for you. That's our core competency, like designing a product, making that product is yours. We can take that workload off you. Think about the cash time trade-off that allows. Look for ways where you can generate early income. There may not be any, but just look for ways. Don't miss opportunities. There is a proliferation of regulated technologies, harmonization of jurisdictional requirements, and there's a lot of electronic access going on at the moment. None of this is going to save you time. That's where I come to the end for today. I'll try and answer your questions, but if you want to follow up after this, you've got my email address there, and please get in contact.
Thanks very much, Neil. So I think we're going to open up to questions now. I can see a question from John in the chat, so I'll throw this out to you, Neil, if you haven't read it. So question is, do you believe that current regulatory frameworks can cope with the proliferation of AI-driven solutions and the need for monitoring frequent algorithm updates? If not, how will they likely adapt?
No, I don't believe we are anything like as far advanced as we need to be. How will they adapt? I think you will see a lot more use of the AI in review programs. I would speculate that in 10 years' time, we will be using a significant amount of AI to put the medical device submission together, and the regulators will be using a lot of AI to review that, and the human content will be very much reduced. But I don't think that's all the answer, or even the totality of the answer. We've got to have other ways that we haven't even thought of yet, and we're going to have questions that we haven't even thought of how we should address them.
Great, thanks, Neil. I should say, if anyone wants to ask a question directly, on mic or on camera, just raise your hand and we can call on you and kind of open up your mic if that helps. Otherwise, you can put questions in the chat function, which is great for us as well. Thank you. So I think for me, Neil, kind of hearing all that, there's a few really big takeaways in that, which is kind of one, think where you're going to manufacture, think where you're going to market, and possibly consider that where you manufacture it isn't going to be it won't be the easiest market necessarily. So to kind of think globally in that sense, that's kind of one of the big takeaways. The other one is that, there is harmonization, but actually that harmonization is never perfectly harmonized across all the regions. There'll be similarities, but you have to kind of adapt it to each of those regions to make sure you're compliant with everything. And I think the other bit was, I think you've seen it as well. We've seen it in probably other things as well. The new forms and kind of things, they help the people receiving the form, not necessarily those filling in the form. And I think Neil's kind of picked on the frustration a lot of people have when you've gone halfway through a very detailed form, and then something happens and you lose it all. You seem to lose that capability to go back to it. The other thing to be wary of, if you ever used some of the NHS things where they're asking you questions about your health to see whether you need to see a doctor or a nurse, they do record what answer you put initially, even if you go back and change it. So don't think it's just a free thing until you submit. They can actually start recording what you're putting in as soon as you start entering it. So just be a little bit wary there. I'm not saying you manipulate the system, but if you think, I'll say one thing and check and then say everything else, they can get a report sometimes that says the person initially said this, which is really dangerous. They then change it to being less dangerous. They might flag you up on that. Just a little bit of practical advice I've heard from people out in the real world. So just be a little bit wary of those forms in all circumstances.
Matthew, that's a really interesting point, a good point that you make, because we've seen this also in the regulatory world. One of the things that we thought would be a good idea was to get somebody in our office to go through some of the UK forms, open them up, see what all the answers, what all the questions were, and that would enable us to know for certain products what documents we had to get ready, which meant we had to try different answers to different questions. But then, yes, we got a phone call from MHRA wanting to know what on earth all these products were that we were trying to look after. And no, we were just trying to find out what questions you would ask. It's this frustration. I'm sure the questions seem sensible from a regulator's point of view and structured from a regulator's point of view, but if you're a manufacturer, they always seem to be coming from left field.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of an imbalance there in the system. I think the regulators are trying to get certain answers, but clearly, if you answer a question, it then becomes a very high risk device. you may say, actually, I don't want to make it a high risk. I'll make it less. You might change your answer to make it to, but obviously the regulator's now been informed that you might do that, and they can track you. And I'm sorry, the internet is not anonymous. They can track you by IP address. They can track you by all sorts of things you may not even realize. So just be wary. I'm saying do the right things. Don't try and manipulate the system. But it probably is, if there's any people from the regulatory side out there, perhaps if you give us some information up front, we can then better respond to your questions. So rather than leaving it till the next question till we know what's coming up, if you give us kind of what you're expecting initially, we can get that together and then fill in the forms. It would be quite useful. That's the kind of feedback we can probably give to MHRA or the other bodies. They probably hear that regularly, because if it's going to be AI both sides in the future, it might be an AI war between them. You know, the AI side submitting, AI side reviewing, and seeing where it goes from there. So I'm conscious. Any other questions from people out there? I mean, there's a lot of content and information in there that Neil's gone through. So it's a lot of work. I think the other kind of key takeaway I've taken from that, Neil, is that you need to have a plan. You can't really wing this. You need to kind of know what you. It's kind of the old kind of adage they always say is, you know, plan the flight and then fly the plan, which is, you know, essentially know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And your regulatory kind of work has to be part of a larger plan. Your business plan, your manufacturing plan, your marketing plan. You have to have planned it and consider the IP considerations. I know you're going to talk a bit more about IP potentially, Neil. I don't know if we've covered enough of that, but intellectual property is a big area. It varies by jurisdictions, but something also to be kind of wary of possibly. I don't know if you want to touch on that for us, Neil.
Okay. Let me touch on my theory of bringing a product to market. If you've got something that is a really clever idea, you've thought of this brilliant idea, something that will make life a lot easier in the clinic, but in reality it is just a molded piece of plastic. It's something that is very easy to make. Once you have sold the first one, it doesn't matter what intellectual property protection you have on it, someone out there is going to make a copy of it, and they're going to work on the assumption that you, as a startup business, as a single individual, can't possibly afford and isn't going to pursue it through the courts, and they're going to take the idea. So intellectual property protection is great if you can afford to back it up. If you can't afford to back it up, then you have a product which is easy to copy, then just think the thing to do is to get out there quickly and flood the market so everybody associates your name. You become the biro, the papermate, you become the product, you become the product, your brand becomes the product, and you take that market space.
Great, thank you. I mean, I obviously I deal with lots of innovators who've got an idea, a concept. So it's a matter of understanding how they can protect that, especially when they put a lot of work into it, a lot of thought into it. But it's a matter of understanding through different things as IP. We can get some advice from IP specific lawyers or kind of advisors. Someone will do an initial consultation for free if you want, and they kind of give you a general idea. Some might charge, so just be aware. I think it's another point. You've got right there on the bullet point up on the screen. Time is your enemy. It can also be your friend, but if you can work with time efficiently, so don't waste time doing things that you could have done something better. So spend something on it or find a quicker way of doing it. I think that's the key. And I think the other point is generating income. Don't wait until the final polish. But if you've got something you can get to market early, do that to start kind of bringing in money to support the more advanced, more high risk things potentially.
Yeah, I should say when I got my first house, and this comes back to being a young engineer, then I had to prove I could put in central heating and I could rewire it. I know perfectly well an electrician and a plumber would probably have done it cheaper and certainly in a fraction of the time it took me. Don't think that you have to do everything yourself. It actually will save you a lot of time, and really that's money if you use people who have though the core competencies and regulatory and quality issues are one of those. Don't try and learn them yourself. If you can employ someone else to do it for you and take that burden off you, because you're going to have enough to do developing a product.
Great, thanks, Neil. And I think I should hasten to add that there are private companies that will do that, but also the government is trying to provide more of those things, in the UK at least. So MHRA, NICE, other agencies, so the AI and digital regulations part of kind of NICE and NHS England, they're happy to engage with people with ideas early on, possibly saying, you know, what the regulations are that exist, or maybe where you want to avoid them, or whether you need to be complied with them. They're happy to do a little bit of initial work for free. And I've got to do a plug that we're asked to do, which is the NHS Innovation Service, which is innovation.nhs.uk. That has got a wealth of information on it already. You can register, you can also submit your innovation and then get input directly from some of those agencies, including health innovation networks. That's not a timed one. That's not one that costs you necessarily. It costs you in time, and it will be an adaptive form. So like Neil's warned you, there will be a long form to fill in with nothing. You can save your progress as you go, but a lot of sections. But in terms of a resource for finding out general stuff in the UK mainly, that's a good place to go. I always kind of say to companies based in the UK, UK is a fabulous market, great for proving things, developing things. If you really want to get big, you want to look at the EU and the US. That's where the big, huge, kind of much larger markets are. But then you need to develop your regulatory kind of compliance and how you develop your product accordingly. You can't just move from the UK straight into the EU or straight to the US. You have to adapt it or kind of meet those regulations there. Okay, so I think if any more questions, I don't see any more questions, so I think we might wrap it up. So I'm going to say thank you very much, Neil. Really informative, really kind of detailed and helpful, very specific around kind of medical device regulation and the fact you can't really take anything for granted. You've got to kind of do your homework, make sure you've got all the right submissions for different parts. And I think the big key takeaway is have a plan. Plan it, check it, do it, follow it, and get the right of advice when you need it, possibly paying for it, getting advice from the regulatory agencies to do that well. And I should hasten to add, Health Innovation Networks, all 15 of us, particularly us in Oxford and Thames Valley, we are here to give you initial advice if that helps for any of these kinds of things. If you need some help with getting funding to do some of these bits, kind of real world evidence or kind of doing concepts, things like that, we can help that. So get in touch with us. It's info@healthinnovatiooxford.org is our email address, and we'll send out the slides and the recording so you have all that later on. But with that, I will say thank you very much to everyone. Thank you for giving us your lunch hour, and hopefully you've found that as enlightening as I have. Thank you very much, Neil. I'll linger on just for a little bit, but that's great. Thanks very much, Rochelle, for putting the email address in, and thank you, Rochelle, for doing organization around this. It's really great, and great to see some of the people we've worked with before on the call today. So thanks very much.